Welcome back. I hope you all some food, hopefully. We are ready for the second session where Leon Duchinsky, computer scientist, NLP, natural language processing, and I feel like saying tweetologist or something like that, expert in Twitter.
Is that a polite word?
Hopefully it is. So Leon has multiple affiliations, but only recently he started, very soon starting next week actually, at the ITU in Copenhagen. He's been so helpful to the environment. So if you have participated in some of the different things I've been running in Aarhus for the past couple of years, Leon has often been there, sort of showing up, giving us an interesting presentation about sort of the information that you can extract from stuff you do on social media. Please, Leon, take us away.
Yeah, all right. Hi. What an honor, I have to say it is, to be speaking at Scandinavia's largest university. Great pleasure for me, and thank you for the wonderful introduction, Christopher. I'm currently unemployed, but I'm not looking for a job, moving to ITU Copenhagen. I've had a very busy past couple of years, so I think when the invitation first came, it was one of these affiliations, then the other. The top one is where you'll find me in the future. And I'm going to talk a bit today about, well, actually a lot, about social media, about the biases that we have when we're working with language as data, and the kind of profiling we can do. I've given a few slides of this talk in a few different angles. The profiling word crept in when I was giving a presentation in Russia to security researchers who are interested in how we can profile social media. I thought, all right, hang on. This is probably something that everyone should know, right? This information should be democratized, so it's actually not so powerful in the hands of just one group of researchers. But there's some cool stuff we can do, so let's talk about that. These are some projects I've been involved with in the past. I'll quickly just go through a couple of these. So with theme, this was about fake news. We proposed this in 12. The project finished in 2016, which was the best year to be at the culmination of a long EU project on fake news. We're in a fantastic position analysing all these things. We've had a lot of stuff come out of that, which was very good. At UCSD, I was doing some nice work on, we were talking about temporal data in the previous talk. So we were trying to work out, we fixed a kind of a space, a metric space you can measure, it's got fixed points and stuff. We fixed this, and we'd have concepts move around in this over time from longitudinal data. So for example, the one dream we had was we could have a window here, and we put maybe VHS, and then as we change time, we get DVD and Blu-ray and maybe Netflix, this kind of thing. So we wanted to see what concepts filled which spaces in society over time. It's mathematically extraordinarily difficult, so it remains work in progress. We've had some nice results, and we have the data, which was a hugely difficult thing to come by. Gate was a huge software architecture, maybe 20, 25 years old, general architecture for text engineering. We've had a bunch of DH projects go with this. For example, we were processing documents from the Old Bailey in London, which is a large court that all the cases would go through. So we were able to take this text, people would do OCR, they'd do recognition on it, so we can get digital text, and then we do the processing. That's a lot of fun, right? You can imagine how much you can find from that. UComp, we did about human computation, which was used for crowdsourcing and social media. We'll touch on that again in a little while. TrendMiner was a nice one where we had this dream that maybe social media can predict the stock market. Of course, if it could, the stock market might be a little quicker. I mean, I know it's a very stupid thing, but it's not that stupid, right? But that was a nice finding we had from this. Comrades, we're looking at disaster response. So people use social media after a hurricane, after an earthquake, this kind of thing. And we want to be able to find people who are maybe expressing needs or telling us about infrastructure and connect them with people who can help address those needs, or with people trying to arrange logistics in an area. But we need to understand the kind of language that comes up in these crises. And it actually gives a kind of a ghoulish fetish, because you're studying, you're waiting for the next crisis in the news, and right now you're going to hit the record button and gather that data. We've got some nice results out of it. And then finally, also, we're part of the So Big Data project, along with KCL, about building better architectures to expose all of these tools to everyone. Final little bit of marketing. So I'm co-chair of a major NLP conference this year, Coling. We're very interested in uses of computation and language together. We're interested in linguistic analysis. It's in Santa Fe in August, so don't bring your winter jacket. But if you have something interesting to submit, then we'd absolutely love to hear. We really want to broaden the community for this kind of thing, beyond computer science to the rest of the world. Because we're all using language, there's a lot we can learn from it. And so we should go and share that. Maybe we could share it on social media. So, what is social media? How can we define this? From an NLP point of view, from a natural language processing point of view, the things that are significant for us in social media is firstly, there is no editor. And this separates it a lot from all the media that we've had coming up to this point. Most media has been, and I'm not a media expert, so please forgive me if I get this desperately wrong, but it's been curated by someone maybe trying to determine an angle or a message or set a frame as maybe a social or political frame. And then, so you have this kind of broad level underlying bias and effect on the language. And then also there's a certain correct way of speaking, right? This kind of strong and white style. And then even actually the Associated Press have their distinct style guides biasing this. So you don't end up with a very good sample, very representative idea of language and how people might express themselves and their context through language. So then we remove the editor, right? Now it's a little more fun. We have this social media. Another thing is that it tends to come directly from the end user, from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So this is much more different than what we did before. What kinds of things do we find on social media? Well, there's a lot of information about business, businesses trying to communicate and send messages. We might find emerging messages and content about natural disasters and crises. One major function is the social function, people talking to each other in with a social context, maybe to arrange an event, for example. And then the other 90% is Bieber, and so on and so forth. It's like 60%. Okay, but it's really powerful stuff. It's what we would have called in 2012, 2013 big data. Turns out all the funding bodies are very bored of the term big data now, so we try to avoid it. Also, it's a real pain to work with, just because it's so big. You end up doing all kinds of very, just go with it and call it very nerdy things with computers just to get the basic simple concept. But it's really valuable too, because there's just so much variety in there. So there's this Gartner definition of big data. What you need to be big data, well, you have to have velocity. All right, we have 900 million documents, 900 million messages per day, just from Twitter, which doesn't really cover all of the world, doesn't even cover all of the internet-connected world, right, which is a minor subset, really, of the world. Still, we're getting this high velocity. There has to be volume. Well, we have up to 25 million unique individuals using it per month, every single day, 1 million different people. And then we have this variety, right, the earthquakes, the stops, the pop stars. This was the saddest picture I could find of him. Every other picture of him is very smiling, but this one was alright. So what this kind of acts as is this something which I think is pretty unprecedented, right? It's a sample of all human discourse. Sure, it's a very biased sample, but we haven't really had something of this scale, something where we could really start to claim this very well. And it doesn't only tell you where people are. Don't worry, if you hide your GPS on Twitter, we can still get you to within 25 Ks. And if you don't have any friends, because they won't be hiding their location, right? So we can work that through network. But from your linguistic style, we can probably work out where you're living and where you've been and where your parents were. This is another fun price to do through. So we don't one can not only tell where others are, of course one knows where people are, when people are, because there's a timestamp for the message. It's a very fluid medium like this. So you have this metadata, and people then tell you what they're doing. Maybe they're having having a discourse on Twitter, maybe they have some attitude about something, some reaction, something sparked them into entering a debate or making a statement. So it's this really rich source of data. Just ask the NSA. Okay. So, all right, I kind of heard all this when I was getting into social media and thought, yeah, but it's a bit trivial, isn't it? You know, I mean, is there really anything in here from, just coming from a very cold computer scientist perspective, it's a bit skeptical. So what's there to study here? The thing that pushed me over the edge for this was, so there were two things. And this was one of them where we'd known for a long time that the West Nile virus, kind of lethal virus, especially in the States, we know this affects members of the corvid family, things like ravens and crows, before it affects humans. However, it's very expensive to pay people to be on a bicycle or driving around all day long looking for dead crows. So to monitor this is pretty tough, right? But if we study social media with the where, when, and what, and we can maybe pick up the word crow or recognize an image with a crowing, we can run this for a couple of months. Now we have a background model, right? Now we know where crows die. Okay, it's the ghoulish thing, right? It happens. But when we see an anomaly in this model, we see maybe in some city there's way more dead crows than we expect. Then we know we can go and vaccinate vulnerable people. We can clear beds in the hospital. We can book nurses for extra shifts. We can tell the 112 or the 911 operators that they might get a few more calls or to be a bit sensitive to this thing. And so by monitoring social media and building a bit of a model, we end up with fewer dead people. Okay, this was convincing to me. All right. So, I think, yeah, what I'll be talking about mostly will be Twitter. Why in particular Twitter? Well, great researcher Zeynep Tufekci recently had a TED talk, it's very good, proposed that we use Twitter as the model organism. There's people working on, for example, genetics, or many subfields of biology, try to pick a common organism, and then everyone can discuss and exchange their results about this common basis, right? They call it the one model organism. This is the Drosophila melanogaster. This is the fruit fly that will also make your brewing wine into vinegar. It's flawed, sure, but we can pick one thing. Now we have some terms that we have in common. So, what do we find with Twitter? Well, we find there's this huge variety, which is wonderful, right? I mean, compared to curated news, this is a dream come true. The amount of information about people and culture is it's just immense. But also, it's very hard to process because it doesn't look like news, and this is what we've been building tools to process for a few decades. There are some unfair tropes about the users of social media. So actually, we found out that the users are intelligent, they're literate, and they're all expressing an individual style. So when you see those typos, you see the strange ways people are spelling things, actually this has no association with reader literacy. These two graphs show, so this is the distribution of spelling scores in a group of 15-year-old children in the States. Most of them center around this, and what we see here, these are the children who don't use social media very often, or if they do, they don't make mistakes in social media. When we overlay the literacy scores of the other students, those using very stylized language, it's the same distribution. So this variation in language isn't predictive of an inability to follow the rules of language, but rather, as I hope I'll convince you, rather expressions of individuality. And this text is, so we see this text, the social media stuff, is surprisingly formal, in fact. We might see this, right? They see me rolling. Maybe it's a typo. Maybe it's not a typo. We can see now it's consistent, right? And we know that in language, in phonology, some cultural subgroups will drop the G as they're pronouncing words. These are quite coherent groups, and it's a kind of a tribal identity thing that people express and share linguistically. Super consistent. Aha! So it's a different variation, but it's flawless. There's not a single mistake, right? This is just a slightly different way of using language, but it's very, very consistent. You need quite a particular view of language to now still insist that it was wrong, right? You can see this is just an expression of identity. Okay, how about this? So, I used to, when I was talking about social media, I said, God, you won't believe what they get wrong on social media. They can't even write the acronym for oh my God, right? Till one day, a couple of years in, the student put his hand at the back of the class and said, no, they spelled it right. It means oh my beaver. Yeah, and so this is what the believers use to identify each other, OMB. All right. But the data is, I mean, it's dirty, right? And so by now you have a rough idea of what Twitter is. So let's look at some nice difficult tweets. You can see the orthography is off, right? Instead of night, we have NYT. Note it's consistent in the first example. Instead of yeah, right, I am going to. So we've got these 4 words condensed into 4 letters in 1 word. All right. But people say this, right? So why would we not have it recorded in the written medium? It seems perfectly rational to do this. This is how language is used. And then, yeah, God bless, okay, so that's not how you spell bless. It's 5 kisses, okay? This is out of bandwidth. This isn't actually a verb, this is a non-verbal gesture that someone's mapping into a verbal medium. Second one, fragments. Well, if someone writes bonfire tonight, our natural language processing tools will just go crazy. I mean, where's the verb? How do we parse the sentence? Where's the structure? We just have this kind of fragment. But to the reader, it's very clear what the person's telling you, right? They're telling you there will be a bonfire tonight. It's desperately clear. We just need tools that can process this. Okay, and maybe even a bit of sentiment towards Joe, right? He's a member of this group who's recognized. But this is tough. Another thing, the capitalization is can be off. Someone here is maybe trying to advertise. And maybe we've all seen advertisements where the capitalization has been non-standard. This is absolutely fine. We can all detect what's going on here. In fact, the capitalization tells us, as a reader, this is probably commercial or some kind of marketing. But our tools, oh man, they fail on this. They maybe think, well, a capital has to be the name of a person or a place or organization or at the beginning of the sentence. And so we run this, and the tool might tell us that these are all proper nouns, which is useless. We can't do analysis with this. And then finally, yeah, this is a really nice example of the non-verbal mapping, right? There's an explicit marker, the asterisk, and then a couple of little fragments that tell you what the person is trying to express, what their non-verbal action would be. But they only have a verbal channel. And in these days, it was only 140 characters, right? So you get 140 characters of text. How do you express your non-verbal action? You just put asterisks around it. It's fine. Our tools that have been trained on the Wall Street Journal aren't so used to this form of processing text. So, I mean, this was so a ton of my research is I've been on just how to build these tools. We've started to get some really nice results and some better processing of this language, which opens up whole new vistas. Okay, so these are how tweets can be dirty. One of the funny things is that, I mean, we have this idea in statistics of Bayesian modeling, and there's this thing where we call Bayesian surprise, right? So we can look at the whole world and think, well, 90% of the time things are like this, so we assume this is the normal thing, and we don't really notice it, because that's the way things are normally. So when something happens in the 10%, we're quite surprised, right? And so as readers, when we look through social media, we are quite used to well-formed text, especially as academics, I imagine. And so the well-formed tweets, the well-formed social media messages aren't the ones we notice. We notice the ones that look a bit weird, right? They stick out like a sore thumb. And in fact, most tweets, the vast majority of social media messages are linguistically fairly well-formed. And then some others pop out, right? What's going on here? This is just, it's crazy. Okay, so this is, I think the first one means I'm in Chicago. What do we do? Maybe Chinatown, I think Chicago. I don't have enough context for this. The second one, I think, is, it must be from some quite young person living at home with their parents, perhaps. I'm not sure. But the interesting thing we observed here was that when the dialect comes very, very far away from standard language, perhaps the information content is a little lower. Maybe you need a bit more context. This idea of lower absolutely is not objective by any means, right? I mean, just as you're going through this and you're thinking about how can I save people by finding dead crows, maybe not with these two. Or hit the other three. Okay, so other two. All right. A few more things then about the kind of linguistic noise we see in social media. The word order still matters with English, which is a strict word order language, unlike, for example, Russian or Arabic. But this is really tough. If we're relying on word order, then these exclamations and fragments really disrupt the tools that we have. We expect a nice formal preamble to the core concepts one's trying to convey. And whole sequences, whole complete well-formed sequences can be a bit rare. So, for example, in the first one, someone's just saying they are making something to eat, so, but in fact here we don't have a very active verb. We would expect an I am, or maybe even I'm. I think that's okay, right? Not too well. Just making something to eat. Ate all day. Right, so we have these two concepts and fragments. It's okay to put up with a bit of noise. The second one, it's peace green tea time, happy zone. So you're learning all kinds of things about this person's habits, about how they're feeling, about what associations they have, but we don't have the linguistic tools to be able to extract this, even though it seems pretty trivial. There's no, so we don't have these structure cues like capital letters at the front. They're absent in these cases. Other times they might be overused, like in the car wash marketing. Okay, so these are some of the problems we have. The solutions are technical, and I've written many papers about them, and they exist, and you can go and download them, which maybe is what you'd like to hear. If you're using, for example, the Stanford Core NLP, which I heard was in the bias speech, then we have a module for this for English. My work at ITU, I want to build all these tools for Danish in the first 6 months when I'm there, but English is already done. Yeah, but I mean, we need these tools, but let's not go into the technical stuff, right? Let's keep looking at the fun parts. Okay, so we know already that social media is incredibly powerful. It can predict these virus outbreaks. It's this nice sample of global discourse. Other things it can do, well, there was an XKCD comic a little while ago, and they were saying, well, isn't it funny that a tweet might take 10 seconds to compose, but actually then it travels at light speed afterwards, right? Almost. Until you get to the slow Wi-Fi cafe, right? Okay, so they said if someone is in the center of an earthquake, they can write a tweet, and the earthquake travels through the earth at a much lower speed than the speed of light. So after a number of seconds, the tweet will just overtake the earthquake. It's meant to be a very trivial thing. So the Japanese went and immediately implemented a system for doing this, for scanning social media, looking for social media messages reporting earthquakes, added it to their extensive earthquake monitoring systems, and got out earthquake warnings 2 seconds earlier than they had before. All right, that's nice. If the building is falling down, those 2 seconds make a difference. And then USGS, the body for this, same thing. And Australia, of course, they have these huge areas with nothing in the outback, nothing apart from dry trees and dry grasslands. And so if you see a bit of smoke, maybe you won't report it, but maybe you will write it on social media. So now a few reports of smoke in the outback mean that tweets will automatically send out a fire crew to see how things are. So that's powerful stuff, but our current tools really suck on it. F1 is a measure of quality that is great if it's over about 85%, and is usable if it's over about 75%, and if it's below you have problems. These are way below, right? Both the Stanford state-of-the-art tool and the more recent one, Sen. And even if we take things down to just one topic on social media, just tweets about politics, actually those would probably be very, very varied, wouldn't they? Maybe just tweets about the digital humanities. Okay, I'd expect some consistency in this. Maybe we can get to 66. That's still a problem, right? With more topics, it goes lower. So it becomes a little more important to think about why this is. What kind of variance do we see? What kind of things could cause this variance in social media? Well, firstly, there's a temporal variance, right? This inescapable temporal variance. We have this kind of linear, unidirectional, single influence of time that we can't escape, which will mean that concepts like names of leaders will take on different meanings through time. Then we have these daily cycles of what topics people talk about throughout the day. And people often talk about work, they might talk about family a little later, maybe talk about socializing on some days of the week, because we also have weekly cycles. You know, with this big peak on Wednesday. Wednesday is the day when people are most bored at work. If you look at any graph of internet usage, or sales on retail sites, or just internet visits, Wednesday is this big peak, goes down on Friday, and then a little bit of the weekend. Or hump day in American parlance. And then also the time of year. Of course, there are seasonal behaviors. People have different topics to discuss in the run-up to Christmas. They have different topics to discuss in their local winter. Right? Winter isn't always there because we also have these spatial variations. For example, we're just trying to do this for English, right? And this is super tough, even for the world's most well-resourced language. I mean, we're spoiled, actually, as English speakers, just with the number of resources we have and the amount of money put into NLP, machine learning, in English contexts. But these usually only work for American English, right? I say this as a British speaker. But also, there are so many Anglophone regions around, right? What about Botswana? What about the dialects in Africa's least corrupt nation, right? It's less corrupt than Portugal, for example. Quite a rich area. Where do you think their language technology is? Of course, they're using what the Americans have to. Or they're having to use what the Americans do. The same for Singapore, where you have this wonderful blending of Mandarin, merchant English from hundreds of years ago, very cute stuff. But it's only fair that the tools work for this, so we can study it and so the citizens can benefit from it. Then we have different surface forms for the same concepts, jam or jelly or jello. Jelly is the one that has two meanings, right? Jam and jello are signifiers of where someone comes from. If you never say jello, but you do say jam a lot as a food, yeah, all right, there's some British in there, isn't there? And then there are different signifiers. An organization, a commercial organization in the States might be an LLC, but if we see a commercial organization written as a DAC, maybe Google DAC, then we know it's talking about the Irish branch. It's a different variety of English. Okay, and then again, we see there's a lot of social variation. So the Wall Street Journal would often talk about things that are interesting to the Wall Street Journal readers and writers. The average income of a Wall Street Journal reader is, I think this year, $340,000 US. So it's not even the 95%, right? It's quite a narrow part of society. Whereas on social media, this has exploded into people really talk about, well, what people who care about this kind of thing really talk about. And we might hear mention of internet celebrities, like Disney's biggest troublemaker, PewDiePie, maybe ex-actors like LeVar Burton, and then also characters that only exist in the media, like TV characters. I'm not a Game of Thrones follower. This is my best attempt at spelling Daenerys. I'm sure it's wrong. Or then you might remember from The Wire, McNulty. Okay, so this is a character again that would crop up. We won't find these people using a gazetteer of names. Or, you know, if you try and find a list of common names, well, of course, it won't happen. And so you need to be able to pick up on this variety. And our tools can't do it. And expanding them so they can pick up on what people really say in language is a fun challenge. Okay, what else can we characterize from social media text? Well, there are a couple of qualitative and quantitative dimensions for describing a genre of text. And we can readily apply these to social media. So we should dive into the deep end with Twitter, right? I mean, if you look at Facebook, people write quite long posts, some of them even rather well composed. I think the more of a politician you are, the longer the post. Must be some correlation. Anyway, let's go for the rougher text, right? Because I think once we can do the roughest language, the most varied language, then we should be well equipped to do the more conservative text. So, qualitative description. First, we can see there's great diversity in these users, but they're not illiterate. So there was one, so people off social media, just people in person, want to represent how they speak, and they want to map this to how they write. So they take their dialect, they take their accent, and they'll write it down. I'm sure if there are any of you from Jutland, I hope many, you're quite comfortable with writing the word tights, even if you're talking to someone from Copenhagen in a colloquial context, right? People use these words when they're writing. And they'll also, to try and distinguish themselves, there's some nice, there was an anthropologist, Metropolis, who was talking about people moving to big cities, having an identity crisis, and realizing on the farm you could be a unique person, but you go to Paris, and suddenly there are many people from farms that perform the function you do. So there's this reinvention of personality. We even see it in modern cities, right, of hipsters, for example, coming in, finding something hyper-individual, well, you haven't quite heard of this, but I like it, I guess we're all cool together. So people try and do this also in social media, where they'll take their entire stylistic repertoire and pick very carefully, very deliberately, in order to represent an online persona. This represents itself to us as a weird, wrong language. It's really not wrong, right? And then, even among these users using the very conservative standard text or the hyper-individualized stuff, we see the same distribution of literacy scores. So this is how we know it's not a literacy thing. All right. We do see these emoticons, little smileys and things. This is a kind of almost the basic unit of a non-verbal expression. They have a pragmatic function, so they can tell us what the stance is, whether someone feels more or less stressed in their communication. And also, they're not necessarily just pictograms, right? We'll often see phrasal abbreviations, like SMH, for shaking my head, LOL, laughing out loud, People will just stick in these 3-letter phrases that could look like a misspelt word to a very naive program. And then also people will try and represent, even if you've picked a word that is quite standard, you can express some sentiment through it by lengthening the word using a bit of character repetition, right? If you think something's cool, then you write C-O-L. But if it's cool, then you can add more O's and more L's. And now this is expressed in social media. So this variance is really important stuff. Unsurprisingly, I'm sure many of you have considered this already, there are social variables associated with some of these transformations. So we already know there's more slang in a less formal situation, right? Formality, slang, kind of this inverse relationship. And we'll see this on Twitter. Maybe you could even monitor an individual user's way of speaking and see who they're addressing and what kind of relationship they have with that person by whether or not they use more or less slang than they normally do, right? So you can work out these kind of personal relationships just from language. And of course, as a listener, if you were all there in person, of course you could do this anyway. So maybe it's not a big surprise. As we saw earlier, G dropping is mapped from speech into text. Sometimes you'll see, instead of an NG or ING at the end of an English word, you might see an IN or an IN apostrophe. There's a kind of sub-variation there. And then, as we well know, lexemes can have a spatial association within the language. So some people in different regions use different words. This is uncontroversial, but the characteristics of that region, the social characteristics of that region, and who takes on those terms, can tell us something about the author. So, for example, people who use ain't instead of is not or am not. This can tell us firstly where they're from, and then also put them perhaps in a social or economic, give them a social or economic characterization. And the amount of this variation that we have shows us really how biased our existing resources are, right? I mean, we don't see any of these things in Wall Street Journal texts or New York Times texts. And it turns out most of the data sets that we've been building our entire field upon were curated media text, mostly built by working-age white men from the coastal USA. This doesn't represent the world, and it doesn't represent even the average, probably doesn't very well represent the personal interactions between the people doing it. So yeah, but we do see that our tools don't work on this data. So we don't really have very much data that is free from this demographic bias, right? That's like the new frontier. All right, things that we can measure. Well, there are a few different metrics we can pick out. I won't go too heavily into most of these, but there are citations given. So we do know that Twitter is actually more conservative and more formal than, for example, SMS or online chat. It's surprising. The hypothesis behind this is that when you SMS with one person, right? So you have the most intimate conversation setting is just two people alone, unobserved. That's an SMS conversation, right? Probably unobserved. Ask the NSA. Whereas with Twitter, by default, it's broadcast to everyone. So instantly, people are a little bit on stage. I'm sure many of them enjoy it, but they are a little more conservative and a little more formal, possibly because of this. For me, the hypothesis fits okay. I'm not sure how to falsify them. Also, I think due to the length limit with the messages, people tend to be very brief, very careful with their word choice, dense in what Halliday calls lexical words. These would be verbs and nouns. You ditch all the prepositions, right? When you have 140 characters, you just focus on the core concepts. And then the tweets are generally used to either share news or to broadcast an individual's status, which kind of is like a news anyway, right? Like a micro newspaper. So that's the style in general. How about when we look at individuals? Well, we can measure whether or not people are addressing a large audience, perhaps if they're using plural forms of you, or if they're using an individualistic style. And as you go over all the people, you see people actually take a combination of these. They'll take both first and third person pronouns, right? So there's conversation and broadcast messages. There's a huge mixture. And also we can try and measure the the age of the audience, a little roughly. So there's one divider, there's another one later on, which I think is a little more fun. But between whether people use really or very as an intensifier predicts their age. Of course, with tweets, we saw would be a younger audience. Definitely a younger audience in 2003, 5 years before the platform. Okay. What this leads to from a technical point of view is that we have a lot of what we call unseen words in tweets. Words that we haven't seen before. We don't know what they are, what they mean, what they're trying to do. So in fact, these tend to come in two general classes. The first is when we have a standard token, a standard word, something we know very well, but spelled in a non-standard way. Okay, so there's been some alteration for some reason. The other case is when we have a non-standard token, some word that we don't usually see, but in fact it is spelled correctly. So I'll admit my mistake, of course. OMB was in the second class, right? This was intentionally spelled OMB. It's the orthography for the word is correct, but the word itself is very unusual. And again, Huntingdon with a D is a very common surname, but doesn't refer to a particular medical condition, Huntington. So if you see someone mention Huntington, maybe it's not in the dictionary, depending on how big the dictionary is, right? But the meaning is very different depending on which of these orthographies is found. Okay, 3 big challenges we have. Oh god. What language is this, right? This is like the basic challenge. If you have to do any processing of text, you need at least to know what language the text is in. We find this very hard. Yeah, so the first is a sentence which I believe is in reasonably okay Dutch. Yeah, okay. No contradiction there, great. But it's really hard for the systems. Firstly, we have this very well-known French actor, Jacques Cousteau. And then they finish, as many L2 speakers do, with a brief bit of English at the end. So our language detection system is kind of lost, right? We've mixed in 3 languages here. Wonderful, thank you so much. For the human, it's quite easy to decipher. I say that, so of course everyone has a great grip on which language the second tweet is written in, right? Okay, so for this one, I mean, it's hard for the systems. We have RT, we don't know this word. It's not language, of course. What's a tompingram? A tompingram? Don't know. So this is out of our dictionary. Viva Las Vegas, looks Spanish to me. 16 is a number, no signal here, hyphen, nothing. Word news, okay, 1 English word, 3 Spanish words. Some hashtag, this isn't in our dictionary either, right? And then a URL. This is impossible. For me, I would say probably English. Right? I mean, Viva, we can put Las Vegas is in an English-speaking area, or the big Las Vegas is. News, why would you write news if the audience wasn't an English-speaking one? But this is very hard for the systems. So this is one challenge. The next one, spelling mistakes are just so tough. Okay, so here we can see a user who's been typing with a concern. I wonder if Subato is okay. They hit the spacebar a little bit too early, or they hit the R a little too late, as you wish. But now we have 2 new words. So we can only recognize for 2/3 of the sentence, but 1/3, who knows? Maybe it's even hard to pick it up as English, that stuff. The next one, no homework tonight. Is it surprising? Well, maybe there should be some homework, right? But this is, again, this is tricky. So these little orthographic failures get in there. Last one, Derek. Okay, if we spell Derek with a lowercase d, we don't recognize him. He's just a common noun. He's been downgraded from a proper noun. Miles could be a person, but he's more likely to be a person if he gets his capital M. Otherwise, he's just a distance metric, right? Marie Claire was a person, but now is an organization, right? Making a publication. So this shouldn't be recognized as a person, but our systems say, yeah, okay, the first 2, I don't know, but Marie Claire with a capitalization, gotcha, definitely a person. No, wrong. And then also we might find picked up as a person the name Exodus Porter. Probably an alright person, actually a beer. This is tough, okay? Yeah, my favorite challenge though with finding the names has to be this fellow, Mr. Spicy Pickle Jr. I mean, alright. So what are some tools we can use to process this text? No maths, I promise. I edited out every bit I saw, mostly because that's not the point of the lecture, right? I mean, we're here to use tools, and I like to deliver all this research as tools that can be used. So let's talk about those. One really nice thing we have is this ability to represent text, represent words based on their distributionality. The fundamental idea comes from this just this idea that we should know the meaning of words by the company they keep. Right? We should be able to guess what a word means from how it's used in the rest of the sentence. I drank an Exodus porter. Probably not a person. So there's this one tool, brown clustering, where you can take a big amount of text, just a text file, and you can feed it into one program, and it puts all the words it finds into groups together. And in computing terms, it's ancient, it's Paleolithic, and it only uses 2 words at a time, which isn't a lot of information. But, for example, if we're trying to process social media text, we might need to work out when things are happening. So we can have a look at some words like tomorrow, right, which tells us when something's happening. There's a specific word with just one function, which is a temporal one. And if we find the cluster of words that occur in a similar context, in similar places in a sentence to the word tomorrow, we get these results. I mean, this is just beautiful, right? Now we've understood what all these words mean. We can just anchor them straight away. And all we had to do was run one program on one file. It's not a holy grail, but it's within reach. There are other distributional representations. There are these embeddings where we take a word, put it in a space with a number of dimensions. So if we have a square space, we've got 2 dimensions. We can put one word here, another one here, and now we know they're far apart. Or maybe this word here and it's plural there. And the plurals are a little bit south, but not too far. Okay. So these can help, but they don't do the clustering directly. One thing we can then do, though, we have this problem, right? What if someone has a new way of spelling tomorrow? And I think after you've seen this many, it's okay to expect there are even more. You know, there's a lot of variation. So you can build a little state machine where you start with one letter, then maybe you can go to another, maybe you can go back, and this, what we would say, this generates words. So this is for a shortening of because, which one might write COS, but here it can be COS or COZ, COSS or COZZZ, and so on. So we broaden the clusters that we have. Other things we can do with this. So there's one line of thought, actually I think maybe that's not so pushful these days, but there used to be a line of thought saying we should normalize this text, right? We should make it into something we do expect. So we need to resolve some slang. There's been a bit of success using, trying to use a noisy channel model, but it's really tough to convert things to a standard way of speaking. For example, to go from, so if apolitical isn't in the dictionary, or unarmored, and neither of them were in our example data, so the system says, I know a word that is in the system, political. So we remove the letter A, now we've got it right. No, you've changed the meaning completely, right? So it's a bit of a disaster. So maybe a better way of treating this is to say we have many different domains, many personal, individual domains. Okay, so that's what we can do with the language. These are some of the tools we have for processing it. But I think for the rest of the talk, I want to talk about 2 main themes. Firstly, how can we capture this language? And then, what does it tell us? So we had one project at Sheffield, took a little while, where we tried to build a corpus that would be more representative than others that we had. So we thought we need to capture that temporal variation, right? So we took the data from 6 years of samples, which took 6 years to collect. We sampled this over different temporal cycles, took things from different times of week, times in the year. Then we went for 6 Anglophone regions. We would have liked to go for more, and I'll show you why we didn't shortly. And then also we wanted different social segments. So we took a general segment, which I think is the most, kind of one of the most socializing and colloquialism in it. Then also we took one just for news, and another segment for news commentary, and so on. Okay, so but annotating then this data, marking the data and what things we find was pretty tough. We did it through crowdsourcing, where you can put a job up, and then many people can choose to complete this micro task. And they're paid, we timed them and then made sure they're paid a living wage for this. A UK living wage, most of them are from India, so I think that's probably quite fair. Definitely would be in Britain. But we couldn't use the most popular platform, Mechanical Turk, So we went through Crowdflower instead. We built a plugin for doing this. And then our workflow was at this point quite nice and smooth. We could load a data set, describe the task, put in our key, our secret key, to connect everything, and then we hit launch on the job, and we're done. And we get the results, sent back to us okay. Yeah. The task was pretty tough though. People need some training in annotating text. Of course, your average person sitting at a computer looking for work on the internet isn't so well trained in linguistic annotation. And I think that's okay, that's pretty reasonable. So we had to integrate into our work a few training jobs, right? We'd say we'll give you 6 examples, and we always give a bit of text describing the task, and then you get 6 or 7 that you can have a go at and see if you get it right. And if we make a mistake, you can write back to us saying, actually, the way you're evaluating things isn't so good. But the solution was we have to keep the instructions brief. The interface has to be clean. In fact, making the interface very clean and simple gives better performance than translating it into the worker's native language. So you might find, so a clean interface is way more important than having the language understood. And there shouldn't be so much language anyway, right? Long instructions are no fun for anyone. And so here would be an example set of instructions. Some examples of what isn't a company. I won't go through those in detail. Okay. What did we find? Well, we found that different people know different things. And if we got our experts, if we only had our academics do it, they would miss certain things, but they'd be very confident in their results, and they tend to agree with each other. That's just what the data said, I mean. All right, but of course, I mean, intuitively, any individual person has quite limited world knowledge, and if you build a group through homophily, people who have common interests, perhaps you don't get the widest covering of all potential knowledge. So we found actually experts really suck for this. If you don't believe me, okay, this is a real document. What is this referring to? Okay, but of course, computer science academics don't really. Actually, after putting out this a few times, there was one poor chap just put his hand up sheepishly. Is it something Kardashian? Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah, okay. So we found we have to actually ignore our metrics for this, right? We have to ignore how much people agree with each other, because we want to get a breadth of knowledge, not knowledge that everyone agrees on, right? And this kind of fits the media we're looking at. We're after a really broad range of concepts, not just the conservative core set everyone can agree about. So instead, we just pulled all the results together, and if anyone said something, we just accept it, put it in. What these figures show, so the experts, compared with what's really there, experts would get 31% of what's really there, but they would agree with each other 84% of the time. When we look at the crowd, they get 84% of what is there, but they only agree with each other 35% of the time, because they're all saying different things. All right? So this told us, okay, we're addressing this kind of data the right way. And in the end, after we went through and we asked people to do a verification step, could this actually be a TV program? And then people look and say, KKTMI, yeah, it could be a TV program. After this, then they start to agree. So this was nice. And we got some really good, consistent results in this data set. We were able to collect it over some parts of the world. These here, the thing was, we could only go for places where we could find crowd workers. So documents from Australia, we'd only get Australians to annotate, right? I mean, I don't know about Australian town names, I don't know about Australian companies, I'm a terrible person to do this. But Australians have a much better chance. The thing is, there are no crowd workers from Botswana, or from the Bahamas, or from South Africa, or Malta. So it's hard to get annotated data in these varieties of English. One other thing we found, so we went and compared this with a data set from one of our core data sets, all about news. And this is the popular surface forms that we found, right? So these are the names of the popular people in that data set, and the locations, the organizations. So straight away we can see, all right, so our data is maybe fairly contemporary, but we couldn't work out what's going on with the people in this news data set from the 90s. Right? It's a little strange. This is from the Wall Street Journal, and CNN and ABC. It Turns out they did all their sampling during a week where there was a cricket tournament, and they have nearly the complete roster of the Pakistani cricket team as their top 20 most frequent people, because they didn't correct for a temporal variation. So, okay, that's a strong result, I'll take it. Okay, so just as I wrap up, I might go slightly over. What does the So what does this variation tell us? Anyway, what do these little things we have tell us? Well, there's a nice early bit of work. There was Dirk Hovey, used to be at CST in Copenhagen, then over to Duku, and then now Milan, which is a little further away. Not much though. So he, in this piece of research that he led, they trained like a representation of the data, right? They tried to learn the meanings of the words over a whole corpus, but also they took a corpus, not of news, but of trust pilot reviews. Now, when you're making a review, maybe you can choose to leave your name, and with your name, they ask you about your gender and your location. So this is nice, right? If you want to say, and also your age. So now we can segment the data and say, okay, so what kind of, we can just get text from just male authors, from female authors from Unser, you know, we can really nicely segment this data. And for every single set of these, you find you get better results. For example, if we were to take people from Aarhus and the way they write, so we try and learn a system on this, that system is much better at processing text from other people in Aarhus than a general system would be. Okay, there's something going on here, right? And then a system, so if we try and learn about language and induce things about language from text written by women, then actually this system will do much better text written by women than a general purpose system, same for men.
I just almost killed your camera.
Ah, okay. Thank you for not doing it. All right.
Thank you.
So then there's another anecdotal one. There was a young researcher, Ian Stewart, in Canada, and he went and looked at some fora on the internet and saw that these people would never write these two letters, CK. For example, do you feel lucky? They'd never write it. They'd always write CC. So why is this? You know? And it turns out, well, if you go to the States, you have these gangs. There are two big gangs: the Bloods and the Crips, right? Now, if you're the kind of person who doesn't like the Crips, maybe you would be a Crip killer. And so CK becomes this informal reference for a Crip killer. You know? So this is someone who is in the Bloods, who professes to and almost certainly does not do these things. And so if someone is always writing CC instead of CK, now we know that they affiliate themselves with the Crips. They're not a Crip killer, they would never write CK. And this is a really specific demographic that you can get just from one little consistent linguistic variation. Okay, so let's have a little look at a AAVE, African American Vernacular English. And there were two hypotheses in this study. The first one was that ethnicity would be represented in syntax, and the second one, that there would be more use of specialized syntax by females. We already have the data set, right? We have Twitter. So we know that this variation is going to affect what we're trying to do, but we luckily have some tools for general purpose Twitter use. And so there are a few things we could measure. There's this interesting word finna, which means I'm fixing to, comes from colloquial, well, it is colloquial American. So I'm finna to have soup, means I'm arranging my day so that I will have soup. I'm fixing to have soup. This was really present and dominant in AAVE. And then the dropping the S, actually this is something that Danish second language speakers of English also do, but this is a very strong predictor in America, just missing out the inflection on the verb for the third person. Oh man, she run, instead of she runs. This was another consistent signal. So there are a bunch of signals that could be extracted and then measured and correlated with the zip code, I don't remember what the T is, ZCTA, I don't know, something to do with zip codes, but for every zip code, the Americans have kept a record of the precise demographic racial distribution there. So they've looked where the text comes from. Where's this tweeter? Well, we get you within 20Ks, that's probably about one zip code, right? We find that AAVE, this vernacular English, is more common in urban areas. In rural areas, standard English dominates. When we take all these variations together, when they all occur together, then this reflects very strongly in the demographic of the area. So these signals can predict, in gross terms, a kind of zip code level demographic. Okay, so even racial profiling, plus all the other stuff I said, right? It's, yeah. But the individual trait, if someone exhibits just one or two of these linguistic phenomena, it's a weaker predictor. And there was a little bit of support for the gender hypothesis, but way less than the earlier study put forward. So this remains. There were some interesting false positives, right? When you think that you've proven you've done this kind of prediction of racial distribution actually happen. We see deletion of copula in Singapore English, so this is one of the features they're looking for. This happens in another variance of English, because this language is all over the world. And of course, people adapt it to the local context, right? So of course, a little variation is probably found in more than one place. And then if people are quoting rap lyrics or expressing a new persona of themselves, that doesn't tell you so much about the person in terms of race, which the study is looking at. And then thinner was quite problematic. Okay, another thing we did, another thing that was done was, again, by AAVE the year after, looking at these Trustpilot reviews, taking a whole bunch of languages, labeling, well, the users label themselves, okay, so they self-identified with their location, age, and gender, and did, I want to say, a reasonably cheap, in terms of computation time, a reasonably cheap test, a physical test, comes out of the box with R. Yeah. Okay. We find there are different variations. So what we see here, this is the regional distribution of the word pass in Danish Trustpilot users, where blue is higher intensity. No surprises here. Okay. The second one, so there's a reflexive usage of seen and seat. Like if you're giving food, he gave food to his wife. Whose wife is it? Is it another person's or your own wife? And this grammatical distinction is meant to be less present in Jylland and more present in Sjælland. And we see this distribution right here. So this also fit the hypothesis. Okay, and then we could look at the user reviews over a bunch of different languages. And of course, each review comes with a star rating, right? Or at least positive or negative. So you know the attitude of the review. So here are the these are the most frequent words, sorry, that female and male people mention. As you can see, the men are resoundingly positive, right? All right, so. This is like a simple statistical test, right? What a data source, just to have and look at, and the first thing you scratch, well, I kind of expected this, but now you have evidence for it, and then you can go and see the context. I don't know, I find it quite exciting, anyway, sorry. Okay, and then we also saw, based on gender, females use emoticons, these non-verbal motifs, twice as often, so that maybe this channel of communication is considered more important. I don't know. But now we've got some data, we can start investigating these things. The top product categories. For females, pets, clothes and fashion, hotels, fashion accessories. For men, computers, it's so boring, right? Computers, car lights. Sorry if you're a car light enthusiast. Hotels, fashion accessories, all right? So this unification happens pretty quick. Females slightly prefer noseless smileys. But actually, the interesting thing is, there's the same distribution of review scores, right? So the average review score, the number of top scores, the number of minimum scores is exactly the same. Would you guess that from these words? Right? Different. Okay. So it turns out the nose in the smiley has another meaning. This was so they say if you use a nose in your smiley, this is a 2015 paper, so if you use the nose, then there's a chance that you were born in 1980 or earlier. If you don't, from afterwards. Okay, so now we can guess your nose just from the way you write your nose. Sorry, we can guess your age from the way you write your Trustpilot reviews. But of course, maybe you've given your age there. Don't worry, we'll get you on social media. Okay. Let's up the ante. All right, how about what your job is, right? How much do you earn? Let's really get into it. So this was done by some colleagues from Sheffield. They took a 9-class system. This ranking, again, the US thing I think it was, management, professional, skilled trades, sales. From a machine learning point of view, like the base thing is to say, is it A or B? And then if we have to say, is it A, B, to I, this is tough. This is... so now we have 81 options, right? Because it could be something, this is what you predict. Difficult. Anyway, these two guys, Daniel and Nikos, took data from Twitter. They looked at your followers are, your friends are, what hashtags you use, what you retweet and how often you put links in your tweets, how often you tweet at all, and the percentage of tweets that you have in English. Now, if they managed to use these to perfectly predict your income, we'd see a pale graph with a dark line going through the middle. We see a mostly pale graph with most of a dark line going through the middle. So this means they had a pretty strong degree of success. And they've just done this straight away. So they're getting reasonable accuracy of just predicting your wage from the way you tweet, even if you never talk about your wage. Which I don't think most people do. Okay, so there's a lot we can mine from this, right? So where can we go from here? Well, news is kind of like this single frequency light, right? Social media has all that variety, has the whole world, well, has a certain subset of the internet using world who has access to it going on there, which is way more than we find in language we encounter in the news. But most of our language AI and the research around it, right, it also biases the research directions you choose. Most of it was trained on news text. And the bias here is explicit, very easy to look up, very easy to mine. It's from middle-class, white, working-age, educated men working in the 80s and 90s from the US coast, in fact, who are journalists, and they're following the Associated Press guidelines. This is a boring linguistic sample, right? This doesn't tell us so much. But it does give us a little side effect. So when you're using, for example, your predictive text, for example, suggests maybe 3 words you might like to use next. And we know that language frames the way we think, the way we interact with things. So your phone rewards you with a successful interaction if you talk and write like, this is from a brilliant photo series of applicants for exactly this journalist job in the 80s. I mean, I was just scrolling through it. It's actually a really, really nice series. But this is the, so if you put yourself in this frame, then you have a good interaction using technology. And no one uses this less, right? It's getting more and more. But then you get a bad interaction if you don't use language like this. I don't know if that's the kind of thing we want. So a lot of this research has been all on these tiny bias sets of data. There's no variation. I recommend you have a look at some Wall Street Journal if you're not convinced. But now we have this huge, big resource, maybe with a lot of people who can't spell so well, or maybe they can, they're just expressing themselves. And there's a lot of fun things. I hope I've convinced you there's a lot of fun things we can do with it. So I think there's still a bit of hope. Thank you for your time.